All right, what is good? Deepak Chona, Sports Med Analytics, bringing you today's NFL injury updates. Thank you very much for joining. Now let's get it popping. Starting with CeeDee Lamb, a lot of differing reports on this one. The most recent of which is that we would expect a 3 to 4 week absence here. Now, keep in mind, they did not put him on IR. Usually they would if they knew it was going 4 weeks. We would lean him towards a week 6 or 7 return here. And part of the reason for that accelerated timeline compared to what's reported is one, the injury did not look severe. The foot did not get caught. It kind of traveled with him as he got tackled. Secondly, the Dallas Cowboys tend to be on the more aggressive side with these return timelines. And third, CeeDee Lamb has already come out and saying that he is trying to return as early as this week. Now, we don't suspect he will be ready this week. Most players, the vast majority with even a mild high ankle, would miss at least 1 to 2 games. Now, the average on these is about 3. Again, looking at a week 7 as the most likely return here, I think is very realistic. Keep in mind, though, that the early return phase carries a production hit up to about 20%, even for elite players, and a re-injury risk that it lasts about the first 4 weeks of about 15%. And re-injuries are usually worse than the original. So keeping all that in mind, there is some risk involved, but we would expect to see CeeDee Lamb on the relatively sooner side of the reported timeline. Then Jayden Daniels. So he is being called day to day. The average on these knee sprains is 1 to 2 weeks. And based on the fact that he did finish the game, we would suspect this is on the relatively milder side. Now, if this were the playoffs, probably he'd play. But in this case, they're making a judgment call based on his history plus his propensity for contact. He leads the league in contact right now, which is kind of a critical stat in QB injury risk prediction. Now, week 4 is to be determined. We would lean slightly towards him playing, but practice reports will clarify a lot here. Then Mike Evans. So he has a hamstring strain. We saw him storm out into the locker room, slamming his helmet, knocking over a cooler. The reaction suggested that he knew this one was going to come with some missed time, but the reports are, at least from Coach Bowles, that he is reportedly dealing with a low-grade hamstring strain. The MRI is still pending, reportedly getting that on Tuesday. So his week 4 status is to be determined, but even on a mild hamstring, a player of age 32 with his soft tissue history, including notable hamstring history, usually would not play week 4. So we will look for what is hopefully not a long timeline for Mike Evans based on today's comments, but so far all the signs have indicated the otherwise. Then Brock Purdy. So optimism here. Looks like he may be trending towards a week 4 return. He did return to practice last week and was moving and throwing, but it reportedly was a little bit ginger on that foot. And that makes sense because it's key for pushing off. So all the lateral mobility, quick in-pocket movements that quarterbacks need to do would all likely be affected here. With that being said, he has a very reasonable chance of playing week 4, and we would further strengthen those suspicions based on the fact that Mac Jones is now injured dealing with a re-aggravated PCL. Then J.J. McCarthy. So he is reportedly out of the boot now. That is progress. The overall video of the original injury suggested it was on the milder side, and quarterbacks generally take about 2 to 3 weeks for those mild high ankles and tend to return slightly on the sooner of what's reported timelines. Now, we would suspect he has a reasonable chance to play week 5, which would have been 2 weeks out. The original report was 2 to 4 weeks. Either way, we would expect him to be out week 4, but the reason the 2 to 4 week timeline is interesting because week 6 is their bye. So they could buy him an extra 2 weeks depending on, one, how Carson Wentz potentially looks next week, and two, how McCarthy continues to progress, but so far promising signs. Then we have Brandon Aiyuk. Now, the video on Aiyuk so far looks pretty promising in terms of his early return. And keep in mind, though, he was more than just an ACL. He was ACL plus MCL. And with that, the data projects him to have a relatively slow ramp up, usually about 6 weeks. He's eligible to have his PUP tag removed anytime after week 4, which would allow him to start practicing with the team. The data here favors a mid-October return, which would be week 6 or 7 approximately, and it would be reasonable to expect him to come off the PUP a week or two before that. Then Xavier Worthy. So he looks like he's trending towards a week 4 return. The average on these is about 3 weeks, which would approximately be week 4 for him anyway. We would suspect relatively strong production when he is active, but keep in mind the re-injury risk on these is going to be high really for the bulk of the season. Redislocations happen to about half of players in the worst case scenario. Keeping in mind also that a redislocation could end up in surgery early in this before the end of the season. Then Brock Bowers. So he's put up 38 yards, which is of course well below what the standard he has set for himself for 2 weeks in a row now after this PCL sprain. He did have an 83% snap share this past week, which suggests that he hasn't been facing a setback. The dip here averages about 4 weeks. We would consider this a very short window to buy low on Brock Bowers if you can. Again, the very likely outcome is within the next 3 to 4 weeks, he's back to his normal baseline. Then we have Chris Godwin. So they're reportedly targeting a potential week 4 return. We'll see on practice reports how sort of strongly that gets predicted. But the one key to remember with Chris Godwin, having had a major ankle surgery, delayed return, and then a second ankle surgery in between, the early target volume is likely to be very volatile, and the early snap count is likely to be relatively limited. So we would expect some flashes of good production, but keeping all of that in mind, this is not likely to be superstar level Chris Godwin right away. Then Isaiah Likely. So he is likely trending towards a practice and game return for week 4. He has been practicing in limited fashion so far. Keep in mind, though, that wide receivers and tight ends, basically all pass catchers, see both an efficiency dip initially and a snap share dip initially, and also that they have Mark Andrews and plenty of other targets, so they're probably going to work him in on the slower side. Then Tyrone Tracy, so brutal shoulder dislocation on Monday night. The best case scenario here, this is similar to what we talked about a few weeks ago with Xavier Worthy. Best case scenario is that he doesn't have a tremendous amount of internal damage to the joint. He can be treated non-operatively and plan to return in season at an average of 3 weeks from the injury. Now, keep in mind, as we said with Xavier Worthy, high re-injury risk all season, and that really depends to what degree there is internal damage. There is almost always internal damage when you dislocate the shoulder, but the question is just to what extent and how risky is it? There are some cases where that internal damage is too high and they just shut players down for surgery, and that tends to be season ending. That is, of course, the exception. That is not the rule of thumb. Most players are able to return. Don't be totally surprised to see an IR stint, although most players return just before. Then Colston Loveland. So he left week 3 with a hip injury. The reports suggest he has a chance to play week 4. So we really have to follow the practice progression on this. Then Stefon Diggs. He's had relatively weak stats so far, but he's only maxed out at a 53% snap share. And that's really important because if you look at his progression, 41 to 52 to 53 has been the snap percentage that he has played. And that suggests he's in for a sort of extended ramp up, which usually takes about 6 weeks. In that case, we would likely consider buying low on him at the right cost, keeping in mind that most managers are probably losing their patience with Stefon Diggs and maybe overlooking that snap share a bit. Then Terry McLaurin, not a lot of info on this one. Other than that, he's listed with a quad. He left week 3 and did not return. There really wasn't any clear injury that he sustained from any video, at least. So the timeline's to be determined, and we'll just have to follow the practice reports here. Then Nick Bosa, he tore his ACL. Importantly, it's not the same knee that he had the prior ACL tear on. It's the opposite. And therefore, the average on these is about 10 to 11 months. Defensive players, it tends to be a little bit on the longer side. Then Derek Stingley, he's dealing with an oblique injury. He's listed as day-to-day. That's often played through. Pending practice, most players would be able to return for week 4. Then Calijah Kancey just had surgery for his pec muscle. The average is typically 3 to 4 months, but keep in mind, recent developments may have accelerated this pretty significantly in that J.J. Watt did test it and returned in about 8 weeks to practice and a couple weeks later to game. So it's possible that we may see him towards the end of the season. And that's all we got for now. Thank you very much for joining, and we will catch you again soon.